When we say that the mind is a battlefield, we're not speaking in metaphors for the sake of drama. We are describing reality. Every struggle you face out there in the world is preceded by a struggle that takes place within you. Before you quit a job, betray a friend, lash out in anger, or abandon your potential, there is always a thought. That thought comes first. It may whisper doubt, you're not good enough. It may suggest fear, you'll fail if you try. Or it may seduce you with comfort. Why work hard when you can just rest? The battlefield is not the office, the classroom, or the street. It is the silent, invisible realm of thought. And if you lose there, you lose everywhere else. The terrifying thing about this battlefield is that it is constant. You cannot escape it. Even when you are alone, even when the world is quiet, your mind is not. It is alive, restless, and often unruly. Most people underestimate how easily it can betray them. We like to imagine that our actions are rational, that we are always in charge. But in truth, much of the time, we are reacting to internal voices, impulses, and half-formed emotions. That is why the undisciplined mind is dangerous. It makes you a slave to forces you don't even recognize. Discipline, then, is not about punishing yourself or adopting rigid routines for their own sake. Discipline is about sovereignty. It's about reclaiming ownership over the very thing that dictates your life. Think about it. Everything you do, everything you become begins as a thought. If those thoughts are disorganized, negative, or dominated by fear, then the trajectory of your life bends downward. But if your thoughts are disciplined, guided, and sharpened, you begin to act with clarity and courage. That is the difference between someone who drifts aimlessly and someone who builds a meaningful life. One of the tragedies of modern existence is that distraction has been normalized. We live in a world that constantly competes for our attention, social media, endless entertainment, relentless demands. In such an environment, the undisciplined mind becomes scattered and fragmented. You try to focus, but your phone dings. You try to think deeply, but you scroll instead. You tell yourself you're in control, but in truth, you're being pulled like a puppet by external strings. And here's the thing, no one wins a battle when their army is scattered. In the same way, no one wins at life when their mind is scattered. A disciplined mind, on the other hand, learns to resist those impulses. It doesn't silence them entirely. You'll never completely escape temptation or doubt, but it refuses to let them dictate the terms of engagement. It says, I acknowledge this distraction, I see this fear, but I choose my course regardless. That choice, repeated consistently, is what builds strength. Strength doesn't emerge in the absence of struggle. It emerges in the deliberate act of choosing direction despite struggle. And this is where we begin to see the psychological depth of discipline. You cannot always control your environment. You cannot always control how others treat you or what unexpected obstacles will arise. But you can control how your mind responds. The Stoics understood this. They taught that while fortune can strip you of wealth, health, or status, it cannot strip you of your inner fortress unless you surrender it willingly. Discipline is how you defend that fortress, but let's be clear, this is not an easy task. To discipline your mind is to fight against yourself. It is to confront your laziness, your bitterness, your envy, your excuses. It is to admit that the enemy is not always out there in society or circumstance, but in here, in the way you choose to think. And that realization can be both humiliating and liberating. Humiliating because it forces you to recognize your own weakness. Liberating because it shows you that change is possible, because the battlefield is yours to command. Think about the alternative for a moment. What happens if you refuse this discipline? What happens if you let your thoughts wander unchecked? Slowly, chaos takes root. You become reactive, fragile, easily manipulated by every passing opinion or shifting trend. You become someone who can be steered by advertising, by gossip, by fear, by anger. Someone who lacks a core, that is a dangerous way to live because it leaves you vulnerable not only to the cruelty of others, but also to the cruelty of your own mind. Now imagine the opposite. Imagine a mind so disciplined that when fear arises, you examine it before surrendering to it. When anger flares, you hold it long enough to understand whether it serves justice or simply feeds destruction. When distraction tempts you, you choose to remain steady on your task. That kind of mind is unshakable. It is not immune to suffering or failure, but it is resilient. And resilience, in the long run, is more valuable than comfort. So when I say the mind is a battlefield, I mean this: every day you are called to the front lines. Every day you must decide whether to let chaos or order prevail within you. And make no mistake, there is no neutrality here. If you neglect discipline, you are already being conquered. The path is difficult, yes, but so is the cost of surrender. A mind without discipline breeds confusion, weakness, and despair. A mind with discipline breeds strength, direction, and meaning. The choice then is simple, though never easy. Fight the battle within, and you'll find yourself equipped to face the battles without. And if you need one final thought to carry with you, let it be this: the strongest prison you will ever escape, or the strongest kingdom you will ever rule, is the kingdom of your own mind. Choose wisely which one it will be. When we speak of discipline, it isn't enough to think of it merely as the suppression of impulses or the denial of pleasure. True discipline is not about deprivation, it is about order, and at the heart of discipline lies focus. Focus is the weapon that cuts through the chaos of distraction and aligns you with the things that actually matter. Without focus, life dissolves into noise. Without order, the mind becomes a cluttered room where nothing can be found, where you stumble in confusion because every object is misplaced and every thought competes for attention. You've likely experienced this yourself. Try sitting down to work, to study, or even to have a meaningful conversation, and watch how quickly your attention. The mind jumps from one idea to another, your phone vibrates, an intrusive thought arises. You remember something trivial, and suddenly the task before you becomes secondary. And it is precisely in those moments that you discover whether or not you possess a disciplined mind. Because a disciplined mind does not allow itself to be hijacked by every passing impulse. It recognizes distraction as the enemy of progress. It says, I will not serve two masters. I will attend to the thing before me with all the strength I can muster. Think of the mind like a spotlight. Wherever it shines, energy flows. If you scatter that light across 10 different surfaces, the brightness is weak and ineffective. But if you direct it onto one target, the light becomes so concentrated that it can cut through steel. That is what focus does for the mind. It transforms ordinary effort into extraordinary power. But here's the catch: focus does not come naturally. It must be cultivated, and it requires the painful act of letting go. And that's where the idea of order enters the picture. To discipline your mind means to impose order on chaos. It is to decide deliberately what matters most and to structure your thoughts accordingly. But order is costly because it means saying no to the dozens of things that cry out for your attention, so that you can say yes to the few things that will genuinely shape your life. That is a frightening responsibility because it forces you to prioritize, to admit that you cannot do everything, and to confront the possibility that you may be wrong about what is most important. Yet, without that act of ordering, you will live in perpetual distraction, busy but never purposeful, active but never advancing. Psychologically, focus requires the courage to tolerate discomfort. People avoid focus because it feels restrictive. The moment you discipline your mind to concentrate on one task, you encounter boredom, resistance, even anxiety. Your mind rebels because it craves novelty. It wants the cheap dopamine of quick stimulation. And yet, if you can hold steady through that discomfort, if you can resist the temptation to scatter your attention, something remarkable, you discover flow, that deep immersive state where action and awareness merge, where you lose track of time, and where your abilities reach their peak. Flow is not possible without discipline, without first imposing order on your mental chaos. Now, we must also acknowledge the shadow side of order. Too much rigidity can suffocate creativity. A life that is nothing but discipline, stripped of spontaneity, can become sterile and joyless. The goal, therefore, is not absolute order, but dynamic order, a structured focus that leaves room for exploration. Discipline is not about crushing every impulse. It's about deciding which impulses deserve to be followed. It's about holding the reins of a wild horse. You don't hold the horse. You don't let it run uncontrolled. You direct its power with precision. From a philosophical perspective, order is what transforms potential into reality. The mind is full of possibilities, like a canvas waiting to be painted. But unless you impose order, unless you decide where to place the first stroke, nothing will ever materialize. And here is where discipline becomes not just practical, but existential. To live without order is to live in perpetual potential, never in actuality. It is to waste the finite time you've been given in endless distraction, never manifesting what could have been. This is why people who lack focus often feel so dissatisfied. They are busy yet unfulfilled. They mistake motion for progress. They confuse scattered activity with achievement. And over time, this chaos breeds despair because deep down the soul longs for purpose. We are not built to live in endless fragmentation. We are built to align ourselves with meaning. Focus and order are the mechanisms by which we achieve that alignment. Right? So the practical question becomes, how do you impose this order? You start by making small, deliberate choices. You decide what matters most today, not tomorrow, not next year, but today, and you direct your attention there. You build habits that reinforce clarity, journaling, meditation, structured routines. You remove unnecessary distractions, clean your environment, limit the endless noise of digital consumption. These small acts of discipline accumulate until they shape the very architecture of your mind. And here's the paradox. The more order you impose, the more freedom you create. At first, it feels like restriction. It feels like giving up options. But in reality, what you are doing is eliminating the chaos that enslaves you. With order, you gain the freedom to move forward without hesitation, without doubt, without scattering yourself across 100 meaningless pursuits. Freedom is not the absence of limitation. It is the presence of meaningful direction. So when we talk about the power of focus and order, we are really talking about liberation. The mind undisciplined is a prison of chaos. The mind disciplined through focus and order is a key to freedom. And that freedom is not abstract. It manifests in every decision, every action, every step you take toward the life you want to build. And the truth is simple, though not easy. If you refuse to discipline your focus, someone else will. The world is full of forces eager to capture your attention, to sell it, to shape it according to their agenda. But if you impose order within, if you choose deliberately where to shine your mental spotlight, you reclaim your sovereignty. You take command of your life. So remember this, scattered attention leads to a scattered life. Focused attention leads to a meaningful life. And the difference between the two is the discipline to impose order where chaos would otherwise reign. Emotions are among the most powerful forces we experience as human beings. They can inspire us to acts of great courage, love, and creativity, but they can also drag us into despair, bitterness, and destruction. And the difference between those two outcomes, between being lifted up or torn apart, depends largely on the state of the mind that governs them. Without discipline, emotions rule us. With discipline, emotions serve us. That distinction may be the single most important factor in determining the quality of your life. Think about anger, for instance. Anger is not inherently bad. At times, it can even be noble. It's anger at injustice that motivates people to stand up for what is right. But uncontrolled anger, anger without the guidance of a disciplined mind, quickly becomes destructive. It burns bridges, ruins relationships, and blinds judgment. The same is true of fear. Fear can be protective. It keeps us from reckless danger. But when fear dominates the undisciplined mind, it becomes paralysis, a prison that keeps us from ever stepping forward. And then there is despair, that deep emotional weight that tells you nothing will ever improve. Despair, unchecked, leads to hopelessness, and hopelessness leads to surrender. But despair disciplined, looked at through the lens of reason and perspective, can be transformed into fuel. It can become the spark that drives you to seek meaning, to change, to grow. So the problem is not emotion itself. The problem is emotion without discipline. People often assume that disciplining the mind means suppressing emotions, as though the goal is to become cold, detached, unfeeling. That is not discipline. That is denial. True discipline does not suppress emotion. It integrates it. It brings reason and perspective into dialogue with feeling so that the two work together instead of tearing each other apart. It is the process of saying, yes, I feel this anger, fear, sadness, but I will not allow it to dictate my actions blindly. I will examine it, I will understand it, and I will channel it in the right direction. This is why mental discipline is so crucial, because emotions are like wild horses. They are powerful, but left unchecked, they run wherever they please, often off a cliff. Discipline doesn't kill the horse, so it learns how to hold the reins. It directs that raw energy toward a destination that serves you rather than destroys you. A disciplined mind does not deny emotion, it harnesses it psychologically. This requires awareness. Most people are not even conscious of their emotions until those emotions have already seized control. They are halfway through an angry outburst before they realize they are angry. They are drowning in anxiety before they notice fear has crept in. Discipline begins with recognition. It is the act of stepping back, of observing your own inner state, and of naming it without judgment. Only when you can recognize an emotion can you decide what to do with it. And once recognition is achieved, the second step is reframing. A disciplined mind learns how to take the raw data of emotion and reinterpret it in a way that serves growth rather than destruction. Fear becomes a signal that you are standing at the edge of something meaningful. Sadness becomes evidence of love, of caring deeply. Even grief becomes a reminder of the depth of life's significance. Reframing does not erase the pain, but it changes its meaning. And in that shift of meaning lies the potential for transformation. Philosophically, this discipline is about aligning yourself with truth. Emotions are real, but they are not always accurate guides to reality. They tell you how you feel, not necessarily what is true. A disciplined mind recognizes this distinction. It listens to emotion, but then subjects it to the higher standard of truth. Is this anger justified, or is it born from pride? Is this fear protecting me, or is it holding me back? Is this despair an endpoint, or is it a call to rise above my current condition? To ask such questions is to engage in the discipline of thought that elevates emotion from a tyrant to a teacher. Consider what happens when you don't discipline your emotions. You become reactive, tossed around by every wave of feeling. Someone insults you and you explode. A challenge appears and you retreat. A loss occurs and you collapse. In such a state, you are not living. You are merely being lived, pulled along by forces you do not control. But when the mind is disciplined, you become proactive. You still feel the insult, but you choose not to retaliate in blind rage. You still feel the fear, but you choose to act in spite of it. You still feel the grief, but you choose to grow through it. That choice is the essence of freedom. And here's the paradox. When you discipline your emotions, you do not become less human, you become more fully human. For to be human is not simply to feel, but to feel with wisdom. It is to integrate the depths of the heart with the clarity of the mind. It is to live in such a way that emotion enriches your life instead of enslaving it. So the call here is simple, though not easy. Do not aim to erase your emotions, and do not surrender to them either. Aim to master them. To hold the reins firmly, to guide the wild energy within you toward a life that is meaningful, courageous, and good. Because the truth is this: emotions left undisciplined will destroy you, but emotions disciplined by the mind will elevate you. And if you want to test this truth, look at the moments you are most proud of in your life. Were they not moments when you felt strong emotion, but you mastered it, guided it, and transformed it into action? That is the essence of human greatness. So remember this: emotions are powerful servants, but terrible masters. Discipline your mind, and you will no longer be ruled by the storm within. You will ride it toward the horizon of your highest potential. Philosophically, this is why discipline has always been tied to growth. Every great thinker, from the Stoics to modern psychologists, has said the same thing in different words. To discipline your mind is to build your character. It is to construct the inner architecture that allows you to flourish no matter what chaos surrounds you. And the more disciplined you become, the more space you create for growth, because growth does not happen in disorder. Growth requires structure, like a vine that climbs a trellis, like a seed that pushes through the ordered rows of soil. Without structure, growth collapses under its own weight. Discipline is that trellis. Now, I know the objection that arises here. People worry that discipline will make them rigid, joyless, or mechanical. But that is not the goal. Discipline is not about strangling spontaneity. It is about creating the conditions for meaningful spontaneity. Think of a skilled musician. To the audience, their performance looks effortless, free, alive with creativity. But what made that possible? Years of disciplined practice. The discipline built the foundation, the freedom emerged on top of it. The same is true for life. Discipline is the scaffolding that allows you to build something beautiful. When you discipline your mind, you are not shutting yourself off from life. You are opening yourself to life at its fullest. You are no longer a puppet pulled by impulses. You are a person who can choose, who can direct, who can create, and in that choice lies dignity. In that choice lies growth. So the question you must ask yourself is simple. Do you want to live enslaved to chaos? Or do you want to live free through discipline? Because there is no neutral ground. If you refuse to discipline your mind, the world will discipline it for you. Others, social media, your own unregulated emotions, all of these forces will dictate your life if you do not take command of your inner world. But if you accept the burden of discipline, if you choose to order your mind and train your focus, you step into a kind of freedom that most people never know. And this is not just about achievement. It is not just about productivity or success. It is about becoming the kind of person who can endure, who can love deeply, who can contribute meaningfully, who can grow in wisdom and character. That is the ultimate form of freedom, not to be controlled by fear, not to be enslaved by desire, not to be lost in distraction, but to live deliberately with purpose in alignment with what is true and good. So remember this: freedom without discipline is an illusion. It feels like liberty, but it is actually bondage. Real freedom comes when you discipline your mind, when you master yourself, when you grow into the kind of person who can carry the weight of responsibility without breaking. And that is the kind of freedom worth pursuing. Because at the end of the day, discipline is not a prison. It is a key, and when you learn to use it, you unlock the door to the life you were meant to live.